We've all heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, but the thing that we often forget is that it also takes one to support the mother.
Well, speaking of the village, this is our podcast. I'm Nicole Harlow.
And I'm Dawn Thompson, and we're here to connect you with a village of support you need from pregnancy to parenting.
So come on this journey with us as we build your village one episode at a time. All right, welcome. I'm so excited to be here today. My name's Nicole Harlow, joined with my lovely co-host Dawn Thompson, and we are here today with a sleep expert and consultant, Sarah Bossio. I am so excited to talk about this topic. I don't think we have really yet, so let's dive right in. Sarah, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this work, and what you do and how you help other moms.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Dawn and Nicole. As a certified pediatric sleep expert, I help families with children ages 0 all the way up to 8 years old to get their sleep on track. Yeah, so I think it's really important for families to understand that sleep consultants are not just for babies. You can get sleep help for your toddlers, your preschoolers, and even your big kids. So what I do is help families to find ways to teach their children independent sleep habits that they feel really comfortable implementing. So like reading between the lines here, it means that I don't teach cry it out. I try to find individualized. You can't see the screen here if you're listening to this. Nicole is clapping. I don't teach cry it out. I try to teach methods that families feel really comfortable with in ways that they are able to really support their children in actual teaching modalities, right? So when we're teaching, we're supporting, we're involved, we're present. And that's what I really am passionate about. And the way that I got into this was because I was a special ed teacher for 15 years. So I really believe that every child learns differently. Every parent teaches differently. And it's really important to me to meet families where they're at.
I love that. And, I think you hear sleep consultants nowadays and you immediately go to the cry it out, right? And like all the safe sleep, I don't want to say jargon that's out there. It's not jargon, it's real, but that's what people think about when they think sleep consultant. And I would love to debunk some of those myths. And, my first child and what our sleep was very different to what this child and my current, baby is. And there were so many different factors in that. Our house was different. My postpartum anxiety and mood disorder affected it. My breastfeeding relationship, there were so many factors. So I think also I want to just point out, even if you're the same parent, each kid may be a different experience as well.
For sure. And I think too, I used to teach newborn sleep stuff to families, and recognizing that a lot of people think, again, when you say, I don't believe in sleep training, and sleep training has a vast description, and there are people who do believe in, cry it out idea. And I am not a fan. I think it goes against every bodily intuition. I mean, I've seen families who go through or who have done it, and the mom is crying outside the door, listening to her baby cry and just begging, please let the baby stop crying. Please let the baby stop crying. And it literally, I mean, it just, the feeling of that and knowing how your every bodily intuition is saying, no, this is not right. This is not good. And I wish more people would listen to that, because there are much better ways to guide a baby more gently and just encourage good sleep patterns and things like that, right? So what do you think, Sarah, are some of the, I always want people to walk away from our episodes with something tangible that they can do, things they can do right away. So if you're pregnant right now, what are some of the things that that would help their newborn get on a good sleep cycle quickly?
Good question. So if you're pregnant right now and you are nervous about sleep, a quick takeaway I would say is try to get the baby to sleep as much as possible, especially during the day. The two very important things in the early first 16 weeks of life are getting them to eat as much as possible, right? Because we want to make sure that they're eating and growing, and then sleeping because they're going to grow in their sleep as well. And, I really always want to make sure I'm debunking this like old wives' tale of keep them awake all day long. And that means that they're going to sleep all night. Yeah. Dawn's shaking her head. That's not true. They need a ton of sleep, anywhere between 16 and 20 hours total in a 24-hour period. Most of that is not going to be consecutive, right? So there's going to be a lot of breaks in between. So I really encourage parents, you're going to have to do a lot of contact naps. There's going to be a lot of snuggling, right? There's going to be a lot of assisted sleep. There's no such thing as spoiling your baby. You're going to have to rock, and you're going to have to feed, and you're going to they think you're still in the womb. All of this stuff was done for them for a very, very long time. So all of that should continue to be done for them. And don't think that you're creating bad habits. It's not a thing. I still don't think there's bad habits that you can create when a baby's 3 or 4. I think that there's things that you can teach them differently. There's ways and, ways that we sleep that we can teach different when we think that what we're doing now isn't sustainable anymore. Nothing is bad, because as parents, we're all just doing the best that we're trying to do in the moment. So as a newborn family, just know that get your sleep however you can, and just let the baby sleep as much as you are able to allow them to sleep in those early weeks and months of life.
Taught new families, because one of the big issues is the babies have day and night all mixed up, right? That's very common. And the way that I've always taught is that, during the day, you're saying let them sleep as much as possible during the day. I don't know if it's still the same thing as what I used to teach. I'd love your concept on this or ideas on this. But I used to teach people that during the day, you never want the baby to go more than 3 hours at a time during the day. And that means beginning of feeding to the beginning of the next feeding, no more than 3 hours, and wake them up every 3 hours. And then once you get past those, what would be the evening time, or what will be eventually like a normal bedtime, then I say, okay, that's usually when now your newborn is going to want to cluster feed. You see it all the time, right? They cluster feed like crazy from say 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock p.m. is the most common time. And that means, and a lot of people get really frustrated this because they don't understand why their baby is still fussy. And they just ate an hour ago, so they couldn't possibly need to eat again. But actually they do, because what they're doing is when you start seeing cluster feeding, it's actually a good sign, because it means that they are starting to make that switch from day to night sleep. And it means that what they're doing is preparing for trying to do a long sleep. And I talk about how most babies will only do one long sleep in a 24-hour period. And unfortunately, it's often at 10 a.m., right? Or 3 p.m. And now they want to sleep for 4 hours or 5 hours. And the way that you gently coax them to switch that is by making sure you're not letting them do that 4 or 5 hour stretch at 10 o'clock in the morning, because now for sure, you're going to be up multiple times in the night. Yes. And these are just gentle ways, no crying it out, none of that stuff, but it just helps gently curb their sleep schedule to switch over. You were saying yes and nodding the whole time, so I'm guessing that was because I'm not a certified sleep expert. These are just things I learned by taking care of a lot of newborns.
Absolutely. So that's my big thing. During the daytime, we want them to sleep as much as possible. You need to wake them for feeds though. And the max would be 3 hours, right? Possibly 2. If you're nursing, if you're trying to establish that nursing relationship in those early weeks, we're waking them sooner than 3 hours. And then might like to extend that as we're really trying to sort out our days and nights. We want to nap them, light and bright room. Like I'm sitting right in front of a window right now. This is the perfect place for your baby to nap, especially if they came home and they have a little bit of jaundice, right? Yeah. It's great for their skin. It can help with that. And also great for their brains to start to realize their eyes are closed, but even if you close your eyes right now and you're listening to this and it's light out, your eyes are still perceiving the light. So that's going to help with their circadian rhythm. In the middle of the night, it's really helpful to keep it as dark as possible. And when you are feeding and you're diaper changing and you're getting your bearings, right, eventually you're going to be able to do this stuff with your eyes closed in the pitch black, and you're not going to need any light. But it's really helpful as you start to learn how to do all of these things with lights on to just use a red light. So that's really going to help the baby's brain know, okay, even though I am awake and I'm still waking up every 3 or 4 hours to feed during the nighttime, I am using, my nighttime sleep cycles. I am only recognizing that there's red light. I'm not turning on the overhead lights and having a dance in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Right?
I say the same thing. Keep those lights off. I red light I haven't heard, so that's a new one for me. But I always used to just say, just get a nice night light in your room that is not directly next to the baby, but just illuminates the room mildly when you wake up, and do everything that you can as quietly as you can. Reduce any sort of interaction, verbal, with the baby, right? And even though sometimes that 2 a.m. feeding is when you really want to bond with your baby, I get that, because maybe the baby is like awake and looking. But if you are really serious about getting your baby on a good cycle, it's best to avoid any of that, right?
I think you bring up a good point where it's like we tend to think of like sleep training the baby or the infant or the toddler, but realistically, we have to sleep train ourselves and like the parent, because we have to set the expectations, right? Like the expectations sometimes for people are like, oh my gosh, my kid's never going to sleep overnight. And then they're like pleasantly surprised that they do, but they're up, every so amount of hours. And then sometimes the expectations is that like by 3 months, they should be sleeping through the night, no problem. And then that doesn't happen. And then they're frustrated or whatever. So I think it's all about expectation setting as well. Like I know with me, I learned that first like 2-3 weeks where you're just like in a fog, like quite frankly, there is no day and night in my opinion. Like you are just tending to that baby. And like my kids, 3 out of the 4 came at like 7:30 at night. So it was like kind of good because they like started at like a time when it was a normal, then like almost bedtime once we got the birth stuff, all cleaned up and whatnot. But it almost a time when you can like dispel time, right? Like you don't have to worry about I have to get up for work tomorrow. And like, listen, I know this is a whole other subject. Like maybe in 6 weeks you do have to do that, but that initial period where you're just like learning your baby and bonding with your baby, I think so quickly, so often we're like trying to say, okay, we need to get into these really good habits right away. When it's like you said, Sarah, like you're not going to spoil the baby. Like there can be a little bit of like leeway in those first few weeks, and to just learn your baby. Like with my 4th, like he could literally breathe differently, and I knew he was about to like poop, or I knew he was about to fall asleep, or like I was so connected with him in those first couple weeks that like little shifts, I knew what was going to happen next. And like I don't think, again, our society, but like our expectations are not to give ourselves that time to understand. It's like, oh, we need to make sure they're feeding on a schedule. We need to make sure that they're pooping on a schedule. We need to make sure they're sleeping on a schedule. It's like, it'll come. It will all come. So I think, again, like setting the expectations for the parents, like if you guys are listening to this right now and you're like freaking out because you heard all these horror stories about baby sleep and that you're never going to sleep again. And while like I will tell you that's not the case, but if you set your expectations appropriately, that yes, the first few weeks are going to be unlike anything you've ever experienced, then they're not going to be that hard. If you're like, I have 2 weeks and then the baby should be sleeping on a schedule, like you're going to set yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
So that's it's about training the parents too.
For sure.
I think it's important too to know that there
Go
really shouldn't be, like, I always want parents to set their expectations that schedules really aren't a thing until maybe 4 months old. We can talk about routines, right? So if you're type A and it's, I always want to balance, especially for moms who are type A, like me, yep, we're all raising our hands,
Right.
who really in a time in this season of life, right, when a newborn comes and it's chaos and you have zero control, and that a baby comes and there's nothing about your day that you can control. I know with my first, I was like, I need the control and I just need a schedule, so at least I can feel like I have some grasp of my daytime, and that's the only way I can control my own anxiety. And if I could go back to that mom and tell her something, it would be, don't worry so much about a schedule and a time. Maybe start to just think about a routine, and don't even worry about the order of routine. Because I think this is another, a lot of verbiage that I hear online and that people ask me about. It's like, eat, play, sleep, do eat, play, sleep, eat, play, sleep, eat, feed the baby and then play with the baby and then make the baby sleep. So you're never feeding the baby to sleep, and always follow. And I just want people to take a deep breath. And like, that's a really great concept. And does it work sometimes? Yeah. And it's great. Does it work all day? Most of the time it doesn't, because their rhythms aren't going to follow that, because it's not a schedule and they're really inconsistent. So I think just keeping in mind that, like, as long as you are flowing with them and just knowing that, like, we are eating, and at some point we're doing some dummy time, and at some point we are sleeping. And as long as those three things are happening throughout your day and we're changing them, you are good. And I want you to be able to then call people to do all of the other stuff. Like, that's where we need to start thinking about, like, who are your resources to call in so that they can take care of the laundry and the watching the other kids and the making your meals and the, yada, 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 right?
I mean, we talk about that a lot, right? I mean, the name of our podcast is Speaking of the Village, and that's why is this idea that, most people don't have nearly enough support in those first few weeks after they've had their baby. But I do want to get back to that eat, play, sleep thing, because I think, man, that causes a lot of dysfunction for moms, especially in those first couple of weeks. It's like the first couple of weeks, your baby is quite literally sleeping almost all the time.
Yeah.
And so the eat, play part is rare. And if your baby has fallen asleep at the breast into a deep slumber, and you're now like, let's play, like, it just isn't going to work, because that baby is not in play mode. Like, their brain, that's not what their brain is doing right now. Right. And so I hope people just kind of get rid of that. You'll see, if you finish burping and changing the diaper and all of that stuff, and then your baby is still engaged and awake, now it's playtime, because that's what they're ready for. Right. And let's also talk about signs and signals when a newborn is ready for sleep, because I think a lot of people miss those early signals, and then they wait until the baby's fussy. And now you're going to have a hard time getting the baby to settle, because they've passed the early sleep signals. So what are some of those that you could share with these moms today?
Okay, good question. So the fussy and crying means we're already past. We are already overtired. And if we're at that point, then I want you to assist you in every way possible. Then we're going to, like, max soothing to try and get them to fall asleep. So then let's rewind for a little bit. Things I want you to observe are red eyebrows, actually. So a lot of babies don't have very thick eyebrows yet. So where their eyebrows would be, or underneath the very fine hairs they have, you might see that they get red. They might start to stare off. So you might see a little bit of engagement with them. Again, this is like very minimal engagement, especially in the first several weeks. After 8 weeks, there's a big developmental leap, and you might see more interaction, social smiles. They might start staring at the fan and being like, oh, wow, like, that's fascinating, right? When we see that, then we can start to see, like, oh, we've been tracking objects, and all of a sudden we're not. And we're kind of staring through your soul, tugging at the ears, rubbing the head, the back of the head, the hair. Any of those combined with yawning. Yawning, they do all of the time. They'll also sneeze all the time. Sneeze has nothing to do with sleep, but just like fun fact, if you're pregnant, babies sneeze all of the time. Both of those are ways that they clear their airways and regulate their breathing. So yawning doesn't mean tired. It could be a sleepy cue if combined with these other cues.
Babies will rub like this.
Oh yeah, yeah. So if
Right,
they move,
that's a big one. Rub eyes, rub nose, rub their forehead. Like, those are really good cues.
if they're already laying down, because a lot of the times we have them in our arms, right? If they're already laying down, they'll try to self-soothe, sometimes side to side with their head. That can be another one. Sometimes
Side to side movement. It was always the tell for my kids.
yes, yes. This one I feel like is, it's hard. I stay in my sleep lane. However, sometimes a feed and sleep can coincide, right? Like they could be hungry and they could be sleepy at the same time. So they might start rooting. And that could just mean like I am sleepy and I'm also hungry, or I'm sleepy and maybe I'm not starving and I just want a snack, but I'm sleepy and the way that you're going to soothe me is by nursing me, right? So that could also be a sign that they're sleepy. When you see all of those things, then when you see that sign, especially when they're little, give yourself some grace. Sometimes it's really hard to just jump on it and like, let's offer them a nap. You don't need to panic, but it is kind of a short fuse between seeing those signs and reaching overtired. There's not that much of a gap. As they get older, there's going to be a bigger gap and you're going to have a little more time to be able to like do a routine and get them down. And it's not going to be such a quick transition. In the beginning, though, it's pretty quick.
One of the other things, I was actually out to dinner with some friends who have 3-month-old twins, and I could tell that, one of them was starting to show signs of being sleepy and stuff, and he was starting to get a little like agitated and like, and I said, give him here, because we were in a public place. And I could see that he was starting to get overwhelmed. And this is something to just keep in mind if you've got a baby and you're in public, or even in your own house. Like if there's a lot going on, TV's on, the fan is on, like these are all massive visual stimulants to your baby. And it can make it very difficult for them to get down and sleep. And so I took the baby and I immediately started pretty rapid movement. And of course, he fell asleep very quickly. And then I explained to her why that was. That is, babies have a hard time closing their own eyes, ultimately, right? Like they have a hard time closing their eyes to just go to sleep. And so one of the ways that you can help them do that is by making it very difficult for them to focus their eyes. Right. And so a lot of people think the bouncing and the swishing and stuff, that's really, it's obviously the physical part of that is great. But more importantly, what that does is makes their eyes unable to stay focused on something. And when it gets to be too much, they close their eyes. And then once they start closing their eyes, you've helped them now close their eyes by doing all this movement. They will typically go to sleep because they go, okay, I can't do that. That's so much. I can't do it. I'm going to close my eyes. And then they go, oh, and asleep they go. So I don't know if that's something specific that you teach in a way. Maybe you say it differently than what I just did, but that's, one of the things I share a lot too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's part of Harvey Karp's 5 S's too, right? And I think it's an extension of that swaying. So the 5 S's, one of them being swaying, an extended explanation of not just the movement of the swaying, but removing the eye tracking. So you're not able to focus on one thing. This is also like, so I know the aesthetics of having a nursery and having a mobile and, it's so cute and fun. And I'm always the bad guy, but when we have the mobile and when we get to 8 weeks, I'm usually like, you got to remove it. I'm so sorry, because it's, then the baby can get distracted and it's fascinating and they have a hard time closing their eyes. And that's what becomes the thing they focus on. And they don't know that they need to close their eyes and go to sleep. So sometimes it's simple changes like that can make your environment just a little more sleep friendly for them.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot, actually, about removing as much visual stimuli as possible in those first few weeks, because it's a lot and babies can get overstimulated. And the way that you can tell a baby is getting overstimulated is they will stop making direct eye visualization towards anything, and they'll kind of they'll be doing lots of this and like lots of avoidance behavior. And Nicole, this points back to those really tuning in to your baby, like what you just mentioned, is like really tuning in and paying attention, because babies give us signs for everything. They give us signs for everything long before they start crying. And if you just cue in a little bit and pay attention, you'll learn a whole heck of a lot about what your baby needs and wants.
So true.
Yeah. So what are the other things, like, what do you think are the biggest challenges that you see families face when it comes to sleep? I know.
That's a good one. Can I ask ages? Because there's a lot of challenges, but I think specifically for age, what do you think is the most beneficial to answer? So like in the newborn stage, what are the most?
Yeah, let's talk about the newborn stage, because I'm guessing, I mean, we're a pregnancy and postpartum podcast, right? So we're not typically talking to people with 2-year-olds. So let's talk about that newborn stage, or maybe the first sleep regression, right? Because and I mean, and one of the other things I talk about too, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, is that you might be getting into a great sleep pattern with your baby, and suddenly the sleep pattern is a disaster. And almost always it's because the baby's about to do something new. They're about to roll over, they're about to sit up, they're about to whatever, like it's a major thing. And there is some research I know that shows that it's because the synapses in the brain are just firing on all cylinders when they're about to do something major, and it causes sleep disturbance, right?
Okay. So I would say the biggest challenge in the newborn phase is your sleep deprivation. I honestly, I really want to shift the focus from baby to you as a parent. I think the biggest thing to deal with is the fact that if this is your first child, I think even if it's your second or third, it is still hard, because sleep deprivation is hard no matter what, but your body adjusts to it, and it's not something that's new. It doesn't hit you like a truck as it does the first time around.
Yeah.
So it's really challenging for your body to adjust to very, very short phases of sleep, to caring and keeping alive. I mean, not just caring for, keeping another human alive 24 hours a day with really no break. And I'm not even talking about, like, we do have naps, right? Like you can take a nap, you can have your village. There's all of these things that we know we can reach out to our support group. But I think just managing your expectations with, like, for me, the biggest thing was, holy crap, like even with the breaks, I'm still responsible. So there's still in the back of my mind, there's always going to be this little person who I am thinking about. And that's like a really big change for us to make as adults. So I think really helpful thing to have in place prenatal when you're carrying, or even if you're in the early days of postpartum, is just making sure you do have your team in place, right? And if you do have a partner, making sure you have a plan to make sure that you're managing your sleep within expectations, right? We know our sleep is going to be broken. We know it might be a little bit limited. But if you and your partner can make some choices in a period of time when you're not limited on sleep, when you're not at each other's throats, and when you're not angry and resentful at each other, it's going to be just a little bit easier to then walk through this like very intense care that you have for a baby.
I talk about tag teaming, right? Setting up schedules. So like usually when I talk to a couple clients, I will say to them, all right, one of you typically is a deeper sleeper at night and one's a deeper sleeper in the morning. So which one of is it? Because I don't think I've ever come across two people that have the same, like it's one or the other. And so then if mom sleeps deepest at night, then if there's any way possible for the dad to really take over the care of the baby in a separate room so that mom can get a deeper sleep, even if it's for 3 hours or 4 hours max, it's still better than if she knows she's got to listen for that baby, right?
It's the listening. Yeah. You have to be able that's just it, 3 or 4 hours, and 3 or 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep is going to serve you. May not seem like a lot right now, but if
I mean, I would say that to like, you'll feel like $1 million. You'll feel like if you got 4 hours straight at this point, you're going to feel like $1 million. You're going to be like, all right, let's go. I got this. Right. versus if you've got a baby. Because let's be really honest, babies make a lot of noise when they're sleeping. And if you are in this light sleep because the baby over there is going, every 20 minutes, you're not going to get as deep of a sleep if you know that your husband is, say, in the living room with the baby in the bassinet, and you know that you're not having to be responsible. It will make a world of difference. That's what I say about getting postpartum help. Even if you can afford even just like 2 nights a week or even 1 night a week with a postpartum doula that is going to just take care of your baby while you're sleeping, it will make a million.
I think too, I know for me, and I can't speak for other people, but like the anticipation, right? Being a highly like type A anxiety person, it was like you're almost resisting sleep because you don't think you're going to get a lot, or you're not going to get it. Or like, I still, even last night, I will tell you, I have 4 kids, 7, 4.5, 2.5, and just turned 1. So like, to me, going to sleep is, it's a roll of dice. Like, who's going to wake up, right? Is it going to be my 1-year-old? No, last night I was literally like just turned onto the pillow, took my glasses off, and my 4-year-old starts screaming. And we're like, did he pee the bed? Like, well, it was 10:30, right? Go upstairs. I don't even think he was awake, really. Like, he was just screaming for no reason. And like, I laid with him, but then I'm up. Like, I have to reset my cycle. And then it was like going back to, I came back downstairs, and spoiler alert, I co-sleep. So the baby is in my bed, and he starts rustling around, and I was like, I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to wait until he's ready to go, wake up, nurse, and then I'll go to sleep then. Luckily, he like fussed a little bit and then was like out. So, because he's been really good lately, he's kind of gotten to a point where I get most of the night sleep now with him. But it's just like, yeah, it's like roll the dice. Who's going to wake up? So it's hard. Again, in that newborn phase, setting that expectation for yourself is almost like, damn it, can I even? Because like, are they going to wake up? Can I even get to a deep sleep? But that's to both of your point. Like, if you have your partner tag team, or if you have support in that capacity, you can. It's not a shuffle of like, okay, am I going to be able to sleep the full 3-4 hours? No, it's definitely, I am. This is my time to sleep. So you can take that anxiety out, which I think is huge when you're talking about it.
Well, and let's be real, dads need to get that chunk of sleep too, right? Like if they're up, if you guys are, I see so many couples that like the dad wants to be really involved and the mom expects that to be the case. And then they're both waking up every feeding.
No.
Taking care of the baby at the same time, and now nobody's getting any good sleep. You've got, listen, if there's one thing that you take away from this episode, do this. Tag team so that you're each every day getting at least one block of good sleep. The other thing I want to say about what you were just saying, Nicole, is, just gone. No idea. I was just going to say.
The other thing, Dawn, while you try and think of it, the other thing I was thinking too, for families who choose to formula feed from the start. So with my agreement to have a second child was that we would go right to formula because sleep was so hard for me with pumping with my oldest. I had said to my husband, I will do this if we do formula at the hospital, like we'll bring it with us. And the agreement is we will do every other night, because he had never done a night with my oldest. He didn't know what it was like to be up in the middle of the night, pumping with the baby in the middle of my legs, with the bottle from the last pump. Like it was a nightmare for, however many months I endured that. So that's what we did. And so the first night we got home from the hospital, he did the first night of a full night. And then the next night I got the baby for the full night. And so every other night I knew it doesn't matter what tonight goes. It doesn't matter how tonight goes. I've done a whole night, and I had already done 2.5 years of, sleep that had not been what sleep had been before. Mm-hmm. But at least I knew I can do a full night of, junk sleep, and it's okay because I know the next night he's got the baby. And the toddler is more manageable than the baby is at this point. So if that is your choice as a family too, that's another option. Rotate, get your partner involved in that way.
Yeah, we were talking on the assumption that you're breastfeeding, and there are ways to, we usually don't encourage pumping in the first couple weeks of if you are breastfeeding, just because you need to establish your breast milk, and when you start pumping, it can interrupt that. But that being said, also if you get past the first couple weeks, it's okay to pump a bottle, and like dad's going to take that 11 o'clock while you went to bed after the last feeding at 8, mom went to bed, and now dad is taking that 11 o'clock feeding, and you might need to get up to pump because you're feeling too full, but pumping for 5-10 minutes is much easier than that 35-40 minute thing with the, when you're up the whole time and all that.
And I think nowadays, this is getting off sleep and I don't want to go too left, but like nowadays we have like those wearable pumps so that you don't have to necessarily like get up out of bed, go like, of course, like once the milk is there, but like you can set yourself up to where if it's a couple hours, like you could just pop them on, relieve yourself and like be half asleep while you're doing it. I know we haven't touched on this yet. And I know we have other guests too that we're more going to focus on, which is why we're not touching on it. But I do want to preface safe sleep / co-sleep. Like, tell me how you feel about it. And, because listen, there's going to be moms that are like, no way. And then there's going to be moms that are like, absolutely. Right. Like, I think there's a lot. That's one of those things that are spectrum. And I was both of those moms. So I can speak for that. So just, if you want to like, is there a safe way to co-sleep? Like, let's maybe just talk about that for 5 seconds.
Yeah. So I really think that what I want everybody to do is do your research. And then I will also want to make sure that you know what your baby style is, because at the end of the day, you have your vision of what life is going to look like when your baby comes, and then your baby comes and life might look very, very different. So you may say, I am going to be a co-sleeper, and that is absolutely my dream. And it might be an actual nightmare because you can't sleep a wink when the baby is in the bed with you. And if you don't have a bassinet ready, then it's going to, bassinets can come in 24 hours. There's Amazon, like don't panic, right? We live in a world where we can get these resources. But if you're prepared and you have resources that you trust, and I'm talking like not Instagram influencers. I'm talking like you have to stay off Instagram. I want you to stay off TikTok. I want you to go to reputable resources that have information about safe co-sleeping, information about safe sleeping that is not bed sharing, resources that are going to have that available to you. Because at the end of the day, if I'm working with a family in a one-on-one capacity, I'm going to teach safe sleep, just because if I'm working with someone, I want to make sure that the baby is in a safe sleeping container if we are doing any type of sleep training, right? In terms of my certification, etc. I'm a mom though, and guess what? My babies are in my bed too. There were nights where they were. There were nights where I could not. Most of the time, though, I can't sleep. I can't even sleep with my husband.
Right.
I don't want anybody touching me when I'm sleeping, but that's me as a person. So every person is different. And I think that I wish as a community, we would not judge for anybody's individual choices. I wish that we would just honor what everybody's individual choices were, because it works for the mom and it works for the baby. And I wish that we would be able to find really great resources to make sure that at the end of the day, that baby is safe within that environment, because those resources are out there, right?
Yes. We're going to actually that was a perfect answer. And we're actually going to do a co-sleeping episode soon. We've got it booked actually. So that's going to come up where we'll really dive into this. So if that's something that's of interest to you, please check out the episode when it releases. I think that one of the things that I wanted to just address from back to the mom sleep that I tried to think of earlier is that the other thing that happens, I think, for type A personalities like me is used to think like, oh, the baby's going to get up in a half an hour anyways. Like, why should I sleep right now? I'm not going to be able to fall asleep in that time or whatever, And so then you're just like, I think oftentimes type 8 personalities dismiss if there's going to be a short sleep window, and they don't take it because they're like, oh, it's just not worth it. But let me tell you, 20 minutes sometimes can make a difference. Right.
Yes.
And so I always tell people, like, listen, if they're type A, we talk about a lot of type A people because we are them, but I used to do it myself all the time. And then when I had my next set of kids and I knew better, I definitely was just like, even if I don't fall asleep, I'm resting my mind, I'm resting my body, and my body needs it.
Yes. I want to talk about the fact that, you may not be in deep non-REM sleep, right? So there's actually more than just 2 phases of sleep. For the purposes of this, we'll talk about REM and non-REM. REM is our light sleep. It's where we dream. And non-REM is our deep sleep. There's benefits to both. If my baby's going to wake up in 30 or 45 minutes, you're only going to be in REM sleep likely. You probably won't get into a deep REM cycle. And that's okay. Your body is still going to benefit. You may still be aware of your surroundings, and it may feel like, well, I didn't actually sleep. And that's all right, because you still got some rest, and that's going to be enough to charge you. So they say something too, like Albert Einstein and all those other really creative genius brains. Thomas Edison too was another one. They didn't actually sleep. They would take 20 or 30 minute naps at their desk, wake up and power work for 3 hours, take a 20-minute nap, right? So people can actually function like that. So don't discredit the power of those short naps for a short period of time. It's not sustainable for a long period, but in these early weeks of life, it's okay.
Yeah. Well, gosh, we could probably talk on this subject for another half an hour, I don't even know, but we're getting to the end here. So first of all, thank you so much for being on our podcast today, because I think there was a lot of incredible nuggets on this one for sure. The other thing we have to ask, is we ask all of our guests, speaking of the village, besides what you do, Sarah, as a sleep consultant, who do you think is the most crucial thing for families in their village?
Absolutely. So I think the most crucial person in your village is going to be your mental health therapist. So the person who helped me the most with my journey through postpartum depression and anxiety, both with my first and my second, was my therapist. And we worked with her. I worked with her in a personal capacity. We worked together, my husband and I, with her before and after my second pregnancy. And I just we owe a lot of our work as parents and as a family and as on our marriage and, just as our village, our own tiny little village. And I touched on it a little bit before. When we have a plan for things going into a new journey, it's much easier to handle things that we know are going to be hard. Yeah. And I really credit a lot of that plan to my therapist. So if you're a type A person, don't be afraid to reach out to a therapist before, things might not be wacky right now. And there's no reason
100%.
You find someone who fits you right now.
Cool. Well, Sarah, thank you again so much. We appreciate you. Hey, and if you're listening, there's lots of stuff in the show notes. We're glad you're here and listened all the way through. Hopefully you got some really great tidbits, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Speaking of the Village. If you loved today's episode, make sure to hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
And remember, you're not alone. We're here, we're listening, and we're all in this together, because in our village, no mom walks alone.